The insects gathered only on one person's belongings. We first noticed it on the third night. The cabin was quiet except for the wind rattling the old shutters, the distant call of a night bird, and the occasional creak of timber settling under age. At first, we didn't pay much attention. Flies and gnats always drifted indoors, but that night, they seemed to act differently. They hovered around jackets, notebooks, and boots left near the corner, clustering there in dense, writhing swarms, yet completely ignoring the rest of the cabin. It was subtle, the kind of thing that could be dismissed as coincidence, until I realized whose items they were gathering on, Marlowe's. By morning, the effect had intensified. His bed was ringed with insects, their wings vibrating so quickly they created a faint, almost electrical hum. A slight pheromone tang hung in the air, sweet and metallic, like spoiled honey mixed with rust. When Marlowe moved, the swarm parted with uncanny coordination, parting the air as though obeying him, then returning when he stepped away. We all noticed and we tried to make jokes about it, but the buzzing carried an insistence, a rhythm that pressed against your skull when you lingered near the swarm. We began to track it. Anything he touched, the kettle, his notebook, even the patch of floor where he dropped his gloves, would gather insects within minutes. Other surfaces remained untouched. I ran my hand across the table. A tiny beetle brushed past my fingers, ignored, then returned to Marlowe's pile as if its presence elsewhere was a violation. The sound was hypnotic, soft but constant. Wings vibrating in patterns I could almost sense as language, pulses echoing in time with my heartbeat. One afternoon, we tested it. I said aloud, "Do you want us to leave your things alone?" The insects stilled for a moment, mid-flight, then surged, brushing the table and shoes as if in sudden agitation. Marlowe's voice, soft and uncertain, seemed to soothe them. When he whispered, "It's fine," the swarm settled again. That was when unease grew into something colder, sharper. The cabin felt alive, attentive, and it was looking at him, or through him. Sleep became impossible. I lay on the cot, watching shadows creep across the walls, the insects hum amplifying every sigh of the cabin. Their movements were too precise, deliberate, like a choreography. Occasionally, I thought I caught them turning toward us, or at least toward the doorway before deciding otherwise. Still, none of them touched anyone else. Even when we argued, voices sharp and full of tension, the swarm never dispersed to our ears, never approached our items. Only his. By the fifth night, paranoia had taken hold. Each of us watched him from our corners. Every movement he made seemed to provoke the swarm's attention, the insect's behavior subtly reacting to his emotional state. An anxious glance would make them hesitate, a sigh would set them in motion. We tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. They were not just insects. They were something older, agents of a pattern we could not perceive. I touched one of his boots in a moment of reckless curiosity. The tiny creatures crawled across my fingers, their exoskeletons warm and stiff, wings tickling my skin. I thought I felt a pulse beneath them, a hum that resonated into my bones. The swarm recoiled sharply, as if offended, then returned to him, faster and denser. Marlowe laughed nervously, not understanding why we were watching, why we were frightened. But the swarm obeyed him. Late that night, I heard a sound through the microphone we'd left on the table, our attempt to record nocturnal wildlife. There was his breathing, quiet and uneven, followed by the faintest murmur. "Go!" The insects shifted in perfect response, swirling in spirals over his coat, then returning to their fixed pattern around his boots and bag. None of us had said the word. None of us had intended any command. But the forest or the cabin itself listened and obeyed him. It became clear that the cabin, the wind through the eaves, the dust on the floor, the insects themselves were aligned with him, not the rest of us. It was as though he were a node, a signal amplifier for something ancient, unseen, and patient. Each night the air thickened, the pheromone tang more intense, the vibrations in our heads stronger, suggesting presence in the corners, behind the walls, beneath the floor. We could not locate it, could not name it, but we could feel it watching. By the sixth night, we avoided his things entirely. Not out of respect, but survival. Even when he laughed at our caution, the swarm would pause and hover, waiting for the signal in his body language, his breathing. Any sudden movement from us, the wrong gesture, a careless word, elicited a subtle ripple, a shiver through the insects that I felt more than heard. On the last night, Marlowe left the cabin briefly, returning to the woods to check traps. Alone, the room became almost unbearably quiet. Without his presence, the insects scattered briefly, then vanished entirely, leaving only the faint metallic tang of their pheromones behind. And yet, the tape we had left running captured something we did not witness. A whisper beneath the wind, under the rustling wood, faint but clear. "He carries the message." We packed up in silence the next morning. Marlowe seemed unchanged, oblivious, as though none of it had mattered. The insects left with him, or perhaps for him. The cabin remained still, ordinary once again, but I knew that the recordings we carried would never be the same. Each time we listen, we hear the hum beneath the hum, the whisper that isn't ours, the vibrations that follow a logic we cannot decode. And I understand now that the insects were not just drawn to him. They were agents, messengers, witnesses to something older and patient. Watching, measuring, waiting. The air in our own apartments carries the faint metallic tang from that cabin. The insects are gone, but their presence lingers in sound. And I wonder, whenever Marlowe speaks quietly, even over the phone, if the insects are still listening. The trail looped back to camp, but the terrain was subtly wrong. We left camp at dawn, boots sinking slightly into the wet moss that carpeted the forest floor. The canopy above was a dense mosaic of branches, interlaced and trembling with the wind, filtering light into fractured shards of green and gold. Birds called intermittently, though always from angles that felt wrong, as if the forest were stretching sound to confuse us. The air was damp and earthy, rich with the scent of pine needles, moss, and decomposing leaves. Every step carried the faint squelch of soil settling beneath our weight. The trail seemed familiar at first, as though our maps and notes were confirming themselves. But the further we went, the more subtle differences crept in. The curve of a tree that had marked a bend yesterday now leaned slightly farther left. A patch of moss that had felt springy underfoot was suddenly stiff, almost crusted. It was nothing obvious, no missing signposts, no sudden drops, but enough to make the mind hesitate, to make the fingers tighten around trekking poles. We joked about it at first. "Maybe we're just tired," Mara said, brushing damp hair behind her ears. She laughed softly, though the sound seemed to vanish too quickly, as if absorbed by the forest itself. But the joke didn't settle. Every shadow seemed to stretch a fraction too long, every shaft of light bent just enough to disturb the edges of perception. Hours passed. The trail looped inevitably back toward camp. I had marked the route on my map, and the compass confirmed it. Yet when we arrived, something was off. The campsite looked intact, as if untouched, but the small details betrayed a subtle dissonance. Our tent was pitched in the same clearing, but the flap was slightly frayed where it had never been. Our cooking gear lay arranged on the log table, though the mug I had placed near the fire yesterday had shifted a few inches, its handle angled toward the wrong side. Mara knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the ceramic rim. "I could have sworn this was here," she whispered. "And this log?" She pointed at a fallen tree we had leaned sticks against yesterday. Its bark now bore the same lichen, but denser, older, as though months had passed overnight. A distant rustle made us all start. The wind, we told ourselves, but no wind followed. The branches above quivered in a pattern that felt intentional, not random. The leaves shifted against one another with soft, almost synchronous creaks. Our conversation paused. Silence pressed in, not like emptiness but like weight. We decided to walk the trail again, thinking we might be mistaken. The path ahead stretched familiar and inviting, yet each step revealed new alterations. A tree whose trunk had been gnarled now bore a smooth expanse of bark, the knotholes gone. Roots twisted differently, some protruding where yesterday there had been none, subtly guiding our footing. Even the moss was inconsistent, springy in one section, compressed and coarse in another. I noticed my compass flicker, then settle, though we hadn't moved in any direction that should have caused it to shift. Shadows lengthened, contracted, and overlapped in ways that defied logic. The forest seemed to respond to our observation, rearranging itself according to our attention. By late afternoon, Mara stopped abruptly. A familiar rock we had rested against lay ahead, but it was duplicated, as if mirrored. Both boulders were identical in size and texture, positioned at impossible angles. A chill ran down my spine. "This isn't right," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. We pressed on, unnerved. Every familiar landmark that should have guided us home seemed subtly altered. A tree we had counted on for orientation now bore a notch in its trunk we didn't carve. The sunlight filtered through the canopy at an angle that conflicted with the morning, as if the day itself had been shifted. We began to question our memory. Had we truly left camp, or had we been walking in place? Had we looped endlessly without realizing it? By evening, shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the trees. The forest absorbed sound. Footfalls came late, voices arrived flattened and stretched, as though traveling through invisible corridors. Mara whispered, "It's like the forest is curating us." She didn't elaborate, but the words lingered. We dared not speak above a murmur. Returning to the clearing once more, we noticed the most unnerving change yet. Our tent was intact, the cooking gear neatly arranged, but our packs were missing. In their place lay identical bundles of fabric, stitched perfectly like ours but faintly wrong. The seams reversed, zippers inexact, straps slightly twisted. Even the scents were off, faintly acrid, carrying a hint of decay beneath the pine. Panic whispered through us. I reached toward the closest pack, but my hand trembled. The forest remained silent, observing. Every movement felt anticipated, measured, catalogued. The sun had long vanished beyond the canopy, leaving only green-filtered twilight, thick and patient. Mara bent over one of the false packs, her breath misting in the cold air. "They're copying us," she said, voice barely audible. "Everything we do, everything we bring back. They record it, then place it here." A distant wind shifted branches, and we realized that not a single bird called, not a single insect moved. Time had slowed, or perhaps it had been measured differently this entire walk. We could not tell. I noticed a mark in the soil, faint but deliberate, a trail leading from the bundles back into the forest's darker interior. It did not match our steps. Whoever or whatever had left it moved with precision we could not replicate. The forest had created it, or perhaps it had waited for us to arrive, then guided our perceptions. We did not argue. We did not move closer. Dusk thickened into near darkness beneath the canopy. Every sense screamed that the forest had observed, adjusted, and waited. We were both intruders and subjects, catalogued in the subtle shifts of the terrain, the replication of our belongings, the slow, deliberate looping of the trail. By the time we finally decided to sleep in the tent, silence pressed on us like a weight. The wind shifted once more, brushing through leaves, rustling with unnatural deliberation. Somewhere within that thicket of branches and moss, the forest watched. It had curated our path, our items, our perception of reality itself. In the deepest night, when I closed my eyes, I swore I could feel the trail beneath me moving. Not the soil, not the roots, but the memory of our steps, reformed, guided, waiting to fold us back into itself. The forest does not merely contain us. It arranges us, it loops us, and in its patience it waits to decide whether we are ready to leave or whether we ever truly did.